Welcome to Barry's In the Interim podcast, where we explore the cutting edge of innovative clinical trial design for the pharmaceutical and medical industries, and so much more. Let's dive in.
All right, welcome everybody to In the Interim. I'm your host, Scott Barry. Today we are going to talk about a platform trial. We're going to talk about a platform trial in kind of a new, somewhat unique area, orthopedic surgery. And I'm joined today by three scientists here who are going to tell us all about the trial. So I have Dr. Nathan O'Hara. He is an associate professor of orthopedics at the University of Maryland School of Medicine, and he specializes in clinical trial design, health services research, and advanced statistical methods, which we love here on In the Interim. And he serves as the principal epidemiologist and lead analyst for MAPT, and that's the platform trial we're going to talk about. We'll tell you all about what MAPT means. I'm also joined by Dr. Gerard Slobogean, who is a professor of orthopedics and director of the Biomedical and Translational Science Master's Degree Program at the University of California, Irvine. And he's an orthopedic trauma surgeon. And Dr. Sheila Sprague, who's an associate professor in the Department of Surgery and research director of the Surgical Methods Center at McMaster University. And she has a long history, I won't say how long, in orthopedic trials, orthopedic trauma surgery. And her group at the university at McMaster are going to be the data coordinating center for MAPT. So welcome everybody to In the Interim. And so tell me what MAPT is, and the acronym of this is Musculoskeletal Adaptive Platform Trial. So what is that? What is the trial?
Thanks, Scott. Thanks for having us. We're really excited to be here. And I think you highlighted a few things, right? Which is orthopedic surgery has not traditionally been in adaptive platform trials. And a lot of times we haven't actually been in the large trial space. Our group has really tried to push that along with a handful of other individuals in the field. But fundamentally, MSK problems really affect almost everybody at some point over their lifespan. And for us, we mainly focus on injury. And after an injury, a lot of patients are left with, still some degree of MSK impairment. So whether that be a broken wrist, a broken ankle, or major car accident, those are the populations that we've traditionally focused on. And there's millions of people that suffer these injuries, in the U.S. So we wanted to design a trial that would have all the properties that you constantly talk about on your podcast, something that can be adaptive, that can be a platform, meaning that we can focus on the larger population and bring new interventions on and off the platform as we learn about them and reach a certain level of decisional certainty. And then have that flexibility. As I mentioned, we think mainly in the trauma space, but as you start to expand to just musculoskeletal impairment, you could go across all of orthopedics, but you can go even beyond orthopedics. And so we started with a little bit of a narrow focus, but really wanting to use a broad lens.
Okay, so thinking about, and this area is somewhat new to me, but thinking about the patient here, you talked about this. Sounds like acute injury that causes a skeletal issue, and I saw your first domain, so we'll maybe focus a little bit on that. And we all know people, and I'm now of the age of knowing lots of people who get artificial hips. My wife has an artificial knee, for example. This is not chronic type injuries, at least that you're worried about. This is generally an injury causing a skeletal problem. Do I have that right?
Well, both. I mean, I think the issue is I'm an orthopedic trauma surgeon, so my clinical practice is focused on the injury. But we tried to design this from a patient-centered perspective and pick an outcome that really captures an important musculoskeletal endpoint for people that have anything, including chronic knee pain or hip pain, or that gets a hip replacement and things like that. So it may not be sensitive enough for every MSK issue, and so that's why you always pick a good platform, pick a good trial to test your intervention. But we think it's like a 70% solution for a lot of key orthopedic questions out there.
Okay, so maybe it helps then to think about the overall master protocol. You're going to bring in domains which ask specific questions, and you have the first domain. The first domain is funded and apparently just opened. You haven't enrolled patients into it. So maybe and your first one is called faster hip. So what does a patient look like for the faster hip domain that you see, Gerard?
Yeah, so I think on the master protocol side, we're really trying to focus on comparative effectiveness. So decisional dilemmas, treatments that are already in practice. And so faster hip is a focus on a certain population of hip fractures, something that we call minimally displaced femoral neck fractures. So if you think of the ball and socket, is right underneath the ball of the hip joint, and it's broken, but the two pieces aren't widely separated from each other. And so that's the population that we're looking at. And if they are widely separated, they always get some sort of hip replacement, either a total hip replacement or a half hip replacement. But when they're not widely separated like this, there's a dilemma as to whether you should just do a smaller surgery and put a few screws in there, kind of pin the hip, as people would say, or whether you should replace it. And replacing it is a much bigger surgery. So there's that patient-centered dilemma. From a surgeon perspective, one's really small and quick and easy. The other one's a little bit bigger. So is the bigger surgery justified for the patient? And as we know, for older adults, patients that have hip fractures, some of them are, relatively active, and some of them are quite frail too and older. So having evidence to guide this decision is really important for our field.
Okay, so this is somebody's a car accident. I know we have a good bit of Canadian representation, maybe a hockey injury, a skiing accident, where they come in and they've got this moderate. Right now, which one is generally done more? And so is one thought to be, I know standard of care is not the right thing, it's comparative effectiveness, both are done. But what is the relative frequency of replacement as opposed to fixation?
Yeah. I think, the other important part is that these tend to be older adults, right? So the hockey accident and the car accident tend to be higher energy, younger population. So this is focusing on lower energy, a little bit older patients. So in the older adult population, usually what's done is the smaller surgery with the pins or the screws. Okay. And that, we thought universally was a great idea. And as we investigated more, we're seeing complication rates up to 15%. And so that has started to swing the pendulum towards the bigger surgery, the arthroplasty.
Fascinating. Okay. So Nathan, when this trial reads out as sort of the epidemiologist or in this, what impact is this going to have? Just specifically this domain. We'll come back to the larger one and the building this adaptive platform trial. Is this regulatory? Is this funders? Is this are these trauma surgeons that are going to then change their practice? How does this impact when the result reads out?
Yeah, I think the biggest target audience are the surgeons and clinicians that are treating these patients. And so, as Gerard mentioned, we've taken in what we think is a very patient-centered lens to designing the outcome for this study. Historically, a lot of orthopedic trials, and particularly orthopedic trauma research, would focus on reoperation as a primary endpoint. That was very important to surgeons. Their complication rate is important for reimbursement, and hospital administrators care about that. But as we spoke to patients and we did a number of what we call discrete choice experiments to look at patient preferences, the kind of result that we kept on seeing time and time again is that reoperation was important, but it wasn't the most important thing to patients. Patients wanted to resume their lives. They wanted to regain their function. And so ambulation was actually much more important to patients. Of course, everyone wants to survive. That's the top of our hierarchy within this adaptive platform trial. But number 2 is an ambulation status, a 4-level ambulation status. And so they aspire for that. But we recognize that the reoperation complication thing is also really important. We think that rate is high. And so, we have this hierarchical outcome, as I mentioned. So survival is number 1, ambulation status. And then the 3rd level of this 3-level hierarchy is days alive and out of hospital. And so that's meant to capture these complications, both their frequency and some indication of their severity as well. So not all complications are created equal. One that puts you in the hospital for many weeks is going to count worse than one that maybe just requires an ED visit or some consultation with your provider. And so I think going through that process, creating the primary endpoint that is patient-centered is also, I think, taken very well, perceived very well by the orthopedics community, that we hope to then communicate the results to, and share that. We're lucky to partner with a number of professional societies in that space, and hope that the result will be, able to influence practice in a way that provides patient-centered care. It might not be one size fits all, for every patient, but will hopefully provide clinicians with the information that they need to make an informed decision about the best care for the patient that they're treating.
Okay, so you touched on this endpoint and patient-centered and the endpoint, and it sounds like there's no single right answer for this, and so it sounds like a good bit of effort went into this, and so maybe worth identifying so that at least for faster hip, which is the first domain that we've talked about, the primary endpoint for this is a hierarchical endpoint. You're going to do a win ratio between them, and so you're going to rank patients as to their outcome, and that is the first level is death. For that. And then the second level is their ambulation status, and you've broken that up into 4 ordinal categories.
Yes, 4-level ordinal variable. Yeah, so everything from, the worst level is unable to walk. Unfortunately, that occurs some of the time, and then the best level is you're walking independently in the community without an aid, and 2 levels in between there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so the primary endpoint compares a patient. So I got fixation, and another patient got a replacement. You would compare our outcomes, and if I died and the other patient didn't, that patient wins that comparison.
Exactly.
If neither of us, if neither dies, then it's who has better ambulation status, and it's 4 categories to that. If they're tied on that and we both are able to walk without assistance, or we do really well on that, how do you break the tie between us after that?
Then it's the one who has the most number of days alive and out of the hospital within the first 120 days after time 0.
Okay.
Yeah. So
we're both alive for 120 days. So then it's largely days in hospital. Between that is how
120 minus days in hospital.
Yeah. So days free of hospital within the first 120 days. So if the initial procedure, I'm there for 30 days, but I have complications, I have re-surgery, I go back in and spend another 60 days, I'm going to lose that comparison to somebody that doesn't have re-surgery. So in many ways, this endpoint, you think, categorizes that, and within that is the endpoint. Very nice. And I suspect, and maybe this is a question, within orthopedic trials, we do FDA devices for spinal implants and bone putty for things and different stuff. And a lot of it is it's about pain, it's about radiological success and things like that. Never done a win ratio in this. Are you aware of any other orthopedic trial scenarios that does a win ratio?
We've used it before. Yeah. So,
Oh, you have? Okay.
Outside of our
Okay.
group, I'm not sure of others, but it tends to be well received because, again, it depends on what the research question is. If the research question is, an antibiotic powder to prevent infection after orthopedic trauma, you should probably use infection as your primary endpoint for that. However, for these things where, these surgeries that we're comparing, the two different surgical fixation methods, there are a few things that are really important to patients, and there's a hierarchy within that. And so we feel as though the win ratio is patient-centered and respects that hierarchy of elements that are really important to the patients and their recovery.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to add, particularly for all the statisticians and people that are a little more savvy than I am, is some of the statistical efficiencies we realize with this approach as well, right? So a lot of the reoperation type clinical trials that have been done in our field, mandatorily have a 1,500 patient sample size because it's a 8% reoperation rate versus a 5% reoperation rate or whatever. And it doesn't really capture the entire experience for a lot of these patients. And of course, it requires a much larger sample size. And so we feel that we're doing a better job patient-centered wise. We're doing a more efficient study design in that regard as well.
Okay, so let's go to the design and Sheila, you get labeled the statistician of the group. Is that fair? Maybe I won't do that. Okay. I will. Within the design of this, and I know you all have impacted the design. By the way, Jason Connor put us in touch about this very cool trial that we should talk about this. So thanks to Jason Connor for putting in touch. The design, I think, is quite innovative, and within the faster hip, your design is Bayesian. Within that, you've got an adaptive design, so you're doing relatively frequent interim analyses in this. And so tell me about the design. You're going to start enrolling patients. The data's starting to accrue. What are your adaptations in the design in the trial? And I didn't address that to anybody. I don't know if Nathan, you want to address that? And then I'm going to come back to say, Sheila, how are you going to operationalize this thing? Because I think it gets bigger than that. So Nathan, tell me about the design.
Sure. So we'll start, with interim analyses after first 100 patients have completed the primary endpoint follow-up. So that's in a 2 treatment group design. Obviously, that will change depending if we have more than 2 arms within the trial. But start after the first 100 patients and then every 50 patients thereafter that. And so as you mentioned, the win ratio design, which is non-parametric, but we worked with Jason and another colleague, Vitaly Drucker, who's been fantastic and we have a Bayesian version of the win ratio. So we're essentially taking the log estimate of the win ratio and the standard error, and then combining that with a prior within a Monte Carlo simulation to get a posterior probability on that. And one other kind of unique feature of this adaptive platform trial is we have 2 different bins. And so the investigative team will pre-specify whether this is a high differentiation trial or a low differentiation trial. So faster hip is what we would call a high differentiation trial. These surgeries are very different than one another. We need more certainty in our estimate to stop the trial. We have other intervention domains that we're considering. For example, 2 different nutritional supplementations that are pretty similar. Doesn't really affect the patient differently one way or the other. Maybe there's a treatment benefit, but the actual burden of taking one treatment versus the other is not that different. That would be a low differentiation comparison. So the stopping criteria and the posterior probability that we require and to trigger either superiority, inferiority, equivalence is different whether it's a high differentiation or low differentiation. So then there's a different prior applied to either one. So there's a more skeptical prior applied to the high differentiation, not a skeptical with the low differentiation. And so then as we complete each threshold, once you reach that 100 patient threshold, the data goes from Sheila's group at the Method Center at McMaster to an independent statistician and DSMC to review those data and compare the interim results against the stopping criteria that have been pre-specified, depending on whether it's a high differentiation or low differentiation comparison.
Okay, so you have this master protocol, and you're expecting, this is the first domain. You're expecting multiple domains to come in within this. And so at the master protocol level, you've defined multiple ways in which these domains are going to look like when they come in. The high differentiation, the low differentiation. So in the first one, this faster hip scenario, which you've referred to this high differentiation, it's really interesting because I sometimes see comparative effectiveness where you almost define one to be, well, this is the standard of care, and you almost treat it like a new novel therapy being compared to that. Is it statistically different? And when it's not, you end up in a really awkward thing because it's not a new novel therapy compared to something. So you really are treating this, I'll say, symmetric, that both of these are being compared. You could define it as one is superior to the other, and that's completely symmetric as whether fixation or replacement wins. You can also stop when you have high evidence that they're equivalent within that. And so the trial is pretty much, we're going to run, it's a 2-horse race. We're not going to call one of them the standard of care and the other one's got to beat it. You're not giving anything a head start within this. And you're going to say, does one beat the other one, superior or not? Or at some point, you're going to say, look, it's a dead heat. They're non-inferior. You'll publish the data. You'll present all the secondary outcomes. So that's the way this faster hip one is set up. And you're just going to keep doing interims till we find the answer. Is that a reasonable summary of the goal of that?
Exactly, yeah. That's
okay.
Yeah, very well put.
Okay, and the Bayesian part of it, which is, you said it's non-parametric. So Bayesian and non-parametric for our statistician people don't necessarily go together.
No.
But you have phrased it as towards the probability of a win is what's uncertain to us. And that's what you're modeling in a Bayesian way. And so that's how you get your posterior probabilities out at this in the end of the day. Very, very nice.
Yeah. Not a natural fit, but we think is workable.
Okay, and now, for example, the New England Journal of Medicine, so we've had trials that are Bayesian trials, and that all goes over well, but if you submit it, they want everything Bayesian. Is this set up so the whole thing is Bayesian? The analyses of all your endpoints is Bayesian at the end of the day?
Yes, all the secondary endpoints would be analyzed under a Bayesian framework in a more traditional sense, right? The stopping is based on the primary endpoint, and then once you've stopped based off the primary endpoint, then all the secondary endpoints will be analyzed in a more traditional Bayesian sense with logistic regression models and more standard approaches.
Okay, so and this is now. You would love this to address all kinds of questions, and you've got this first domain, and now you're hoping other domains gets funded. You have this really unique thing that somebody else could get something funded and come in and use all of the framework you've set up. So this is really a very cool effort that in many ways, this is a learning environment that you're going to try to fund additional questions to come on here, but others may be able to add on to this and just increase the learning of this. So you're going to have these multiple domains with interim analyses defined every 50 patients. And so Sheila, let's say we've got 3 of these running. We've got these multiple interim analyses. Operationalizing this got to be a little bit sort of nerve-wracking in this for the data coordinating center.
Yeah, it's been a big lift to get this off the ground at our data coordinating center. We've been very well supported. Joe Patterson has been the PI on the faster hip domain. So we've already brought in somebody different, orthopedic surgeon, to lead that domain. And it's funded we were fortunate to have Joe be funded through PCORI, which has allowed us to have a patient-centered focus for getting the data coordinating center going, as well as a lot of engagement for the research coordinators and research teams at our 40 clinical sites. Much of the infrastructure at the Methods Center is very similar, and we were able to use templates from the previous trials that we had have run over the past few years and adapt them to make them suitable for the platform trials. And we have a set of SOP, like we've adopted our SOPs and specific procedures to allow for the conduct of the platform trial.
Very nice. So 40 sites enrolling, and that's U.S. and Canada?
As well as several sites in Europe as well, but mostly in the United States, a handful of sites in Canada, and about 10 or so sites in Europe.
All right, interesting. And so a single database for all the sites?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, everything goes to one database for this intervention domain. And we follow our usual data. My team at the Methods Center follows the usual daily checks of the data, their reports, and we have the DSMC already established. We had our first meeting with them a few weeks ago and went over the processes and procedures and reporting requirements with them. So, yeah.
And so DSMC, is this a safety? Are they charged with safety in monitoring this as well?
Yeah, they're charged with safety as well as looking at the interim analysis results.
Okay. So they're going to be involved in reviewing an interim. It says one of these two therapies is 99.3% better. They'll review that, make sure things look good, and then they make a recommendation, presumably back. Do you have one DSMB that's going to oversee the entire platform, or are you going to sort of create different DSMBs by domain?
Our vision is that we... Go ahead.
Yeah, I think vision broadly have one unifying body, potentially with rotating members if additional expertise is required for certain domains.
Yeah. Okay. Nice. And just for a status of this is you've started opening at sites within this, but you don't have any patients enrolled, so we're at the very, very early stages of this. Is that where the trial sits right now?
Yeah, we actually just opened our first site for screening today, so we're really excited about that. And then we have a few other sites that will be open for enrollment in the next couple of weeks. So we're on track with our timelines for our February 1st first start date for patient enrollment.
So Gerard, what is is there excitement in the orthopedic surgery space for research, for investigating these questions? I know oncology, they're used to this, but what is the reception from orthopedic surgeons about this whole effort?
Yeah, that's a great loaded question. I think there's variability across our field, right? So orthopedics, some people will specialize in joint replacements, some people in fractures, so there's a wide variety there. In my subspecialty in fracture care and trauma care, there's actually been a couple decade sort of history of doing clinical trials. And so a lot of people in our area are familiar. They may not be, statisticians and real experts like you see infectious disease and oncology. There's a lot of people that do extra training in research that we don't really have in our field. So there's general interest. There's a lot of excitement about Bayesian analyses, as they start to think in probabilities, the way they make their clinical decisions. So we've been kind of introducing that to our field, and people have been really excited about that. Platforms also really excite people as they get the concept. And we were joking that, once a week somebody calls up and says, hey, we need a platform in, or I want to start a platform for this, so we're sort of navigating that field. But I wanted to actually bring it, sort of right back to the beginning and to your last comment about the learning health system. We really see this as a big contribution to the field in that space. So, Sheila mentioned Joe Patterson. So Dr. Patterson's an orthopedic surgeon at USC. And so, he had an idea, it fit the platform, it's been brought onto the platform, and now we have another, investigator that's becoming savvy and understands and can lead platform trials. And we have a few others under review that, Nathan mentioned. And similarly, on the funder side, so, we really want to acknowledge NIAMS. They gave us an R34 to go through the planning work, which, as you know, for some academics that are doing other things, it took us a year to do this, to get all the simulations and to understand it and for Sheila's team to operationalize it, right? So, but when we submitted it to NIAMS, they were a little concerned about the proposal because we listed like 10 potential interventions, and they're like, well, we can't fund 10 trials here. What are we funding? And so, Chuck Washabaugh, as the program officer there, really worked with us, brought it to their leadership, and they supported us. And then now PCORI funds the first one because it's very patient-centered and fits their mission. So we really think that this contributes to a system of research where we can learn. And as we get the information we need to improve care, we move on to the next question. Hopefully some of these questions are superior, but some of them may be keep doing what you're doing, have confidence that what you're doing is equivalent, in clinical terms, to the other intervention, and let's test the next thing that may improve mobility and ambulation and days at home for our patients.
All right. So go ahead, Nathan.
Yeah, as I say, to build on that, right? There's so many orthopedic surgeons, investigators within the field that have great clinical questions, but they don't necessarily have the institutional capacity or the support to get it off the ground and run the clinical trial. So our hope is not only to generate evidence to support their clinical practice, as Gerard alluded to, as Joe Patterson being a great example of this, it provides a platform for investigators that have good research questions but don't necessarily have the support today that they need to bring the questions to this platform. And then much of the material has already been developed, the master protocol, some templates for intervention domains. There's a database already constructed, the method center, data safety monitoring is already set up. It's really a much lighter lift for someone who has a really good question. And I think dramatically increases their ability to obtain funding, right, when this infrastructure is already in place.
Yeah. And so it's the whole argument is amazing. And the learning healthcare system that you brought up, Gerard, is something that's just an amazing potential advancement. Right now, if somebody at a site here in Austin, Texas, fits into this and is treated, and somebody does fixation as opposed to replacement, nobody learns from that. Maybe that surgeon learns from that, but the data aren't accumulated. We're treating lots of people without learning from them. Now you're creating this system that we're treating them, we're doing state-of-the-art learning, and treating at the same time. We should be doing this in every healthcare scenario. So that whole idea is incredibly compelling within that. So tell me, in this, when I've been in these efforts, it can be almost intoxicating to, now you've got a patient that you're treating, are you going to try to do factorial things on those same patients? You could go wider and you could look at a completely different kind of injuries, an ankle injury or a leg injury, as opposed to hip. But now that you've got this patient and they agree to be part of this experiment, are there other things you can do? Do you plan to do factorial things within the same patients you've got?
I'll take that from the clinical side, and then can jump in on the methods perspective. But conceptually, we envision being able to learn at every step of that patient's journey, because there's decisional dilemma for everybody, right? So the moment you come in with your hip fracture, should you have a temporary nerve block to decrease the pain? What type of anesthesia should you have? What surgery should you have, obviously? What type of rehab should you have? So we are making these decisions constantly for patients with imperfect information. And so, as you've alluded to, we can start randomizing all those things. We don't have those intervention domains up and running yet, but conceptually, that's what we envision. Now, the question about factorial or not, I think this is already happening in everyday practice. And so by randomizing that helps, I think, helps even the playing field a little bit. Whether it should be analyzed a factorial interaction of interventions or not, I think is up for debate. And people ask us that a lot. And Nathan, you've thought about it a little bit. What's the epidemiology perspective on this from your point?
Yeah, I think, as we build the different intervention domains, I think we'll consider each one independently and look at what else is kind of on the platform at any given time and assess, is there any clinical evidence that there may be an interaction between, this intervention domain and some other intervention domain and address it accordingly. Being in the comparative effectiveness space with, all likely intervention domains to be happening out in the real world as it is already, as Gerard alluded to, I think randomly assigning them is a step better than just letting people make decisions along the pathway and adapting their decisions based off of other random assignments. And so, I think it would be context dependent on what happens. I would err on the side of, I think, fewer will have clinical interactions than we expect, just considering some of the intervention domains that we're considering. I think it's unlikely there's interaction possible. But as we add new intervention domains on, that's part of the consideration.
So with the possibility that a single patient might contribute to multiple questions, and I know you can discuss whether you model interactions there or you don't, part of this, adding other domains to this, other groups coming in, maybe the question, Sheila, is what keeps you up at night? Are there parts to this that make you nervous about the future of the platform?
Yeah, I think there's always something to worry about. And there's also always the general excitement of the next day to keep you up. That keeps me up the most, I think. We really want the platform to be widely used and available for other people. So we have 3 different levels that we plan to have it available. We hope to have it open access and available for other investigators to take the protocol, take the CRFs and some of our other documents and implement it at their method center, data coordinating center with their team. And then our second level is basically open access, but with a little bit more support from Nathan, Gerard, and myself. And then the third level would be running it within the data coordinating center infrastructure that we have already developed with the initial funding and with faster help. So.
Very nice, very nice. So very, very exciting. And I can't. Everybody seems bright-eyed and excited about this. So I don't want to ask various questions. If you're moving forward on this, once results start coming out and the data and all this, it'll be good to come back and ask these questions. When are you maybe hoping for this domain to read out? What would be a great target?
We have a
contractually
obligated target.
Yeah, okay.
It can take us a year.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yep. Very nice, but very exciting as well. Plans to expand beyond 40 sites, is that potentially part of this? If this becomes successful in multiple domains and multiple investigators, is that part of the future?
For sure. We will definitely add additional sites for other intervention domains as we add them on.
Yeah. Very nice. Very nice. Well, an incredible effort, incredible learning healthcare system in kind of a new research area, which is, as you described, is very much needed. And it's not rare. It sounds like within this. So Very, very exciting effort. I love the Bayesian approach to this. I want to make sure we have you guys back and hear how this is going, the updates to this, what's being added to it, and then how the process of this master protocol is going, lessons learned. I think it would be great. But thank you very much for the first interim of this. We'll have multiple interims of this. We have no data yet within this, but appreciate you and thank you all for joining us here in the interim.
Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Really appreciate the show. We learn a lot from it, actually.
Oh, wonderful. I enjoyed doing it. Love to talk groups like this. Until the next time, we'll be here in the interim.